Honestly, with whatever's been planned for this episode, at this rate, I might as well just say that this episode has not been sponsored by Convict Music. Because unlike other episodes where I'm usually about, this episode is about the men or about the women or about both sides, this episode is about being cuffed and being free. Kinda like prison and shit. Kinda like convict music and shit. Kinda like we locked up, they won't let me out. Anyways, Akon used to spit some massive hits back in the day, and I kind of wish that I could start singing them, but I can't do that on the mic because I have shit to talk about. And for us to start things off, I want us to start things off from a cuffed situation here, or at least a locked up situation. Now, the CEO of the crypto exchange platform known as Stodex was recently sentenced to an 11,196-year prison sentence for the loss of $2 billion worth of cryptocurrency that went missing after its founder, Ozier, fled the country. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like if this was a Suicide Squad movie, this guy would be the most infinitely usable character that they would have in the Suicide Squad. 11,196. Even though they were turning this into the number of days the guy would be inside, it's still a lot of time. Get ready for the battle of the sexes. Okay, let's think about this for a second. 11,196, okay? Assuming that these were actual days and you divide them by 365, that's 30 years in prison, okay? That was if you assumed that this wasn't years but days. But this guy is getting it in years, alright? So if by any chance Lady Death doesn't want him and he's granted some form of immortality and this guy lasts the entire sentence, he will be getting out in the year 13,219. Actually, make that 220 because according to the caption it says, and I quote, "The Anatolian Ninth High Criminal Court sentenced Ozier and his two siblings to 11,196 years, 10 months and 15 days in prison, along with a $5 million fine. This followed the collapse of the Turkish crypto exchange in 2021, which left $2 billion in cryptocurrency missing as its founder Ozier fled the country." End quote. Now, considering that this guy already got 11,196 years, adding an extra 10 months and 15 days, what the fuck is that supposed to do though? I'm trying to process all of this, and when you kind of think about it, by the time you're getting to the year 365, you've probably stopped trying to count the days. So by the time you've already done all of those years, plus the 10 months and the 14th day, if you manage to survive that long, your ass will have known prison so much, you'll have probably wanted to stay there a little bit longer because you're tired of the real world and shit. And there's probably free food and, every single prison guard has told their kids about you, so you're like a historical figure and shit. So you leaving is almost like a PR stunt because now you'd have to go back because you leaving would almost be like one of those redemption stories and then all of a sudden that's it. But also on the flip side, it's not like this guy is a particularly skilled special ops fighter or some shit. Otherwise, he'd have been signed up by guys like Suicide Squad for those death-defying missions. By the time the guy's getting out, I'm guessing humans will have probably stopped inhabiting planet Earth. Or maybe he'll have aliens as prison mates. I don't know. Either way, that is something that I feel probably should happen to a lot more of the people that commit financial fraud. But then again, since I am not a part of the justice system, let me leave it at that because I have a podcast I should have started minutes ago and I need to start it in a much more civilized way with a lot less lockups, probably with a little bit more joviality by saying, welcome to Breakdown on West Side, your number one breakdown podcast coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who has 99 problems, but this failed crypto dude has all of them. 11,196. Dude is going to be raped to kingdom come. He's a man who believes that astrology should have been the study of us. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. And I have to admit, I actually kinda like what the hell happened to crypto dude, because I feel like a lot of people who end up doing some form of financial fraud, which involves the theft of a shit ton of people's money to the billions, should probably be getting very hard sentences. And I'm not saying this from a point of spite, it's just when you look at the people who've committed some of the worst forms of financial fraud, save for Bernie Madoff, a lot of them get minimal sentences, or they get to spend their time in minimum correction institutions where it's not even all that bad. It's practically just regular living without all the creature comforts that you would probably like as a person. So you kind of look at how some of these guys behave, considering that they know that they can pay off the judge and they'll pay off the people from the other side, or they'll just pay a bunch of people off. They know that they'll just end up with a much lighter sentence. So at the end of the day, they know that they'll just have to steal a shit ton of money and then they'll get a slap on the wrist, which is very annoying. If people are getting such kinds of sentences, and I'm not saying that they'd have to go to maximum security or anything, but if these guys got such kinds of sentences with like very minimal leniency, I think there'd be fewer people that would be trying to be greedy out here. But then again, I can't really decide how the world is supposed to treat such people because I haven't been paid, plus, I don't know, maybe I've received some fraud money before. But still, it is pretty annoying when you see people who steal billions that affects the livelihoods of so many people, usually just going away with a slap on the wrist in the name of a sentence. But that's not really my place to talk about that shit. My place is to talk about relationships, love, sex, stuff that affects your reproductive parts and all, and I will get to do that in the main topic. But before I get to that, I need to combine this whole love sex thing and the law for a bit, because very recently, actually towards the end of last week, the Supreme Court reaffirmed the right of National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commissions to register as an NGO in Kenya. Now, this happened on the 12th of this month, September 2023, to be more specific. And the reactions that people were having on this entire thing was particularly interesting because it kind of reminded me of the whole topic and the discussion that it brought back in, it was like February of this year, where people's views on this were actually quite split. And for the most part, people were gravitating towards the extreme sides of each. So there were some people, mostly the babes and the LGBT people, who were like, oh, love is love, finally we get a chance, oh, finally, justice has been served and shit. And there was the other side of people who are like, oh, our country is descending down, oh, we decided to listen to the white man, oh, our president has been influenced by such and such, and the West is finally bringing its influence here, and this is going to mess our people up, oh, the world is ending. Like, people were having decidedly split views on this, and to be very honest, like, back then I sort of had a stance on it and I was talking about it, but right now I feel like most of this is a pack of bull, mainly for about two reasons. Now, I do have a piece of the article that I'll just read on this entire thing, then I can give you my thoughts on it. So it says, and I quote, "The Supreme Court of Kenya on Tuesday, September the 12th, dismissed a petition by Homa Bay Town Member of Parliament Peter Kaluma seeking to overturn its ruling that allowed LGBTQ+ members to register an NGO in Kenya. Kaluma had moved to the country's highest court in March to challenge the ruling and how the Supreme Court characterized the term sex in the LGBTQ case. In his application, the Azimio la Umoja legislator argued that the decision to allow the registration was a result of an error from the judges. However, the Supreme Court held that sections 162, 163 and 165 of the Penal Code and provisions of Article 24 of the Constitution do not convey the intention to limit the freedom of association of LGBTQ persons merely due to their sexual orientation." And I'll end quote it there. Alright, so that's pretty much what happened in a nutshell, and I still think that it's a pack of bull for two main reasons. Alright, the first one is, it's actually not as bad as you might think, because from my very limited and possibly non-existent knowledge of the law, there is the freedom of association. It's in the list of freedoms and rights that people have, and your freedom to associate as Kenyans is usually there, and it does not discriminate and say only certain people can associate and not others. Everyone is allowed the freedom of association, all right? So if these guys want to go and register an NGO for the LGBTQ, then let them do that. Because if anything, it actually kind of does benefit Kenyans in one way or another. Because you think about it, when they register the NGO, that means that they're going to have jobs, and that means that they're going to pay people. And for anyone who knows about LGBTQ funding for NGOs, you all know that that's a lot of money that these guys usually throw around here, because this is a place that isn't very pro-LGBTQ. So there's some people that are gonna be making quite a bit of stack here, and they won't have to be actual members of the LGBTQ. You just have to do your job pretty well and get connected and join that company. So as long as you don't talk shit about them, as long as they don't do anything inappropriate to you, you're good. So you get to make better money, which you can use to improve the lives of others as well as yourself, which in and of itself is a win. But now, the other reason why I still think that this is a pack of bull, and this is probably the most important one, is because people give this whole thing so much concentration and so much importance than it probably should have, if you kind of think about it. Because, let me give you a particularly good example. In this same week that just passed, there was a video that the Al-Shabaab posted up online of them going to a site where there was a lab set project happening in Lamu and shooting a couple of people, alright? These were actual Kenyan workers and they were shot in Lamu, which is at the coast of Kenya, alright? In this same exact week, because of this whole LGBTQ thing, leaders from the coast, and I think a good chunk of them were mostly religious ones, were staging demonstrations against the whole LGBTQ people being allowed to have an NGO, because they were thinking that it's going to propagate the pushing of LGBTQ, which is unreligious and quote-unquote unnatural. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not the biggest fan of the LGBTQ, and more so how some of them tend to push for some very, very weird shit, but you're telling me that considering that you've lost some of your own people, some of whom actually were religiously affiliated with you guys, you have more of a problem with two niggas fucking each other in the comfort of their own home versus the people that were killed by the Al-Shabaab. Are you fucking serious? Like, this is why I don't really like taking a stance on this entire thing, because there's some people that are so fixated with the hatred of the LGBT, and there's some LGBT people that are so fixated with them having the freedom to do whatever the fuck they want, that at the end of the day, both these sets of people end up sounding like pieces of shit. But then again, considering that I'm neither for nor against this entire thing, I am going to leave it at that and stick to straight people shit and move it on to our main topic of today. Now, while I was on Reddit this past week, usually there tends to be a bunch of very funny stories that can come from there. But in this particular case, I actually found that the thing that caught my eye wasn't even a story, but rather a question. And it was a very random question, sounded so simple, yet I think to a certain degree might be a little bit complicated for most people to actually verbally give a good response to it. Now the question is particularly simple, and it says, and I quote, "Apart from sex, what is the importance of having a girlfriend?" So this guy practically just said, I just thought about it and it doesn't make sense. Now, of course, as usual, this is Reddit. There were a couple of comments which I will highlight, but for the most part, I'm not even gonna lie. Like, the moment I saw this question, I was like, this question is easy as shit. Then when I thought about answering it, it now started seeming a little bit harder to articulate everything, because I think for most of us, we look at the understanding of having a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a partner and the reasons for it as something that you don't even need to try and verbally give out. Like, it's just a feeling that you get, and you know that it's good, and you know that it's something that you want, so you kind of just go for it. But when I looked at some of the comments, they were actually particularly interesting, because there were some that were nice and straightforward, and there were some that were, for lack of a better word, very, very crude. So one of the nicer ones said, and I quote, "In my case, I have a friend. I will be one of the few men I can openly say I enjoy my girlfriend's company, and she's such a fun person to be around." End quote. Which is actually really, really nice. Which is really, really, really nice as a simple way to think of a partner, to think of someone that you'd probably want to spend the rest of your life with at some point, but ideally someone that you bring so close to you as a guy. Now, there was another comment that said, and I quote, "Someone to love, to share my life with, someone to try out new recipes with, someone to cook for, to travel with, laugh with, having a friend, someone to share those precious little moments we at times tend to keep to ourselves, someone to go exploring existing and new interests with, someone to share ideas with, someone to cuddle at night with as we're watching TV, someone to run errands with, someone to challenge me, and vice versa, personal cheerleader, the list is endless." End quote. And this one, I think, encapsulated most of the reasons that people would say having a girlfriend is for. All right. Now, I did say that there were some crude responses that came from this entire thing, and I will highlight one of them. So it says, and I quote, "If you only view your girlfriend as a source for sex, then there's no argument here that will change your mind. Buy a sex doll or hire a regular prostitute and be happy. Let those who found partners that offer more than sex carry on." End quote. Which sounded like it was particularly said from a very tough part, and I wouldn't be surprised if the person who said this was a woman, because at the end of the day, this sounds like something that, must have really hit someone in the chest. There was another one who said, "Just date a man." So, like, at the end of the day, it seemed like there were some people that were very triggered by this statement, and for someone to say "just date a man," you know very well that it's a woman who said it. But when I was kind of thinking of how to answer this, I actually didn't know how to answer it properly because I haven't been in a relationship for a particularly long time. So I decided to reach out to two of my homies, and I sent the question to them and I asked them for their responses, which they were very happy to give me. So one of them, his name's Kilasi, mad shout out to you Kilasi, said, and I quote, "You date to find a wife/husband, otherwise you're just having fun. It's all about intentionality." End quote. And when I actually read this one seemed like it made quite a bit of sense because, if you look at the original reason for getting into a relationship, that's usually where it stems from. And my other homie that I asked about this, his name is Steven Yanumba, mad shout out to you Steve. What he gave as his answer was companionship. You need that one person who is just simply you in every way. Even if you are different people, the commitment that you have to one another to be each other's keeper transfigures the both of you to know, to understand, and be absolutely everything about each other. That's what true companionship is. End quote. Which almost sounds philosophical when you kind of think about it. But it is pretty smart. It gives an essence of companionship and why companionship is so interesting and a particularly powerful thing. But with all of that said, at least now that I have used the opinions and comments and statements that have been made by others, let me break this question down by looking at the origins of the whole girlfriend, boyfriend, and the relationship that existed before the marriage. Now, if you meet with a lot of our grandparents, okay, maybe if you're Gen Alpha, then probably great-grandparents, but for a good chunk of us, if you probably met with your grandparents and asked about how your grandfather and your grandmother came together, or if you even ask your parents, a lot of them, especially if they're from, Africa, or should I say this part of the world, will talk about how it was an arranged thing, or, you see the person and you could even have your parents go and talk to their parents and organize something, because dating wasn't something that existed back in the day before. The closest thing to it was courtship, and even then, courtship is something that, you would do knowing full well that you're probably going to marry this person. Dating is actually a particularly recent thing. It's like courtship light or marriage pro light, if I can call it that, because you kind of have some of the responsibilities, depending on your age and shit, you kind of have some of the responsibilities that come with being married or, when you're courting someone, but they're not as serious, so the responsibilities are a lot less. You're not required by law to stick with this person, and you practically use this as a way to sort of, test out the capability of the two of you to work as a unit should the two of you choose to get married. That's essentially what dating and relationships and having a girlfriend or a boyfriend is supposed to be about. You guys pretty much testing the waters to see if this is someone that you're going to have long term. Like, that's where it practically comes from. Now, today, or at least in today's day and age, it's not necessarily that way because people have given much lighter versions of the relationship even before you look at, the lighter versions of having some sort of commitment, which will be situationships, friends with benefits, and so on and so forth. Like, relationships, or should I say commitment pre-marriage or partnership pre-marriage, originally existed and exists in its most intentional form as a preparation for some sort of a long-term partnership with this person. Ideally, that used to be called marriage, but nowadays people like to take their own way with that one. Although, for the sake of the current reality, that's not always the reason. People are supposed to date for intentionality, but nowadays a lot more people date for fun, which is where the whole, this is someone that you'd want to shag and you'd want to be with, but you don't necessarily think that you would want to marry them or have some sort of long-term relationship kind of crops in. And I guess that's where some of the people who probably don't understand why they should date or why they'd want to date will probably end up kind of like this guy. Because at the end of it, the process is still the same, or at least the idea and the thought process around dating and relationships is still the same. It's just that the tweaks that are there in today's day and age allow it to be more casual. So you can date someone without the intention of marrying them. You can date someone because you really like them and you'd want to be with them, and you would want to be with them and have no one else, or you'd want to be with them and have them not be with anyone else. All right. So at the end of it, dating is pretty much mostly about that. But now, if you look at someone who's saying that, apart from having sex, what's the reason that you should have a partner, a girlfriend or a boyfriend, then maybe now you need to start reevaluating why it is you'd have them. Because you think about it, you can get a friends with benefits and get the exact same thing. You can practically be shagging one person, provided they're not about promiscuity, and get more or less the same exact thing. So why get into a relationship and put in that level of commitment, have that extended sense of responsibility to protect the person, and yet all you're doing is getting sex? I can understand why someone who wouldn't know about this would be a little bit confused, and for someone who only sees the relationship and having the girlfriend as just for sex would probably not see the full value of being in a relationship, which is what a lot of people today simply have an issue with. They're not seeing the good of the relationship because a good number of them actually don't know why it is that they're in a relationship. They like the person and they want to commit to them up until they don't. They are not ready to be accountable. They are not ready to acknowledge that, they can be a little bit selfish sometimes, and that's not good for the relationship. In the relationship, you have to focus on being a little bit more selfless so that you guys can care for each other's desires and feelings, which, if you're dating the person, should be quite important to you. And with that said, let me just conclude by saying this. If you're a dude and you have a girlfriend and you believe that it's about the sex, then you're right. You're actually not wrong. Sex is one of the best pros that comes with being in a relationship, at least today. You can have sex with one constant person, and trust me, that shit can actually get better over time. But if you think of it as the only reason to get a girlfriend or the only reason to have a girlfriend, then maybe you need to reevaluate your relationship with the opposite sex. Because in reality, if you're looking at having a girlfriend as just the sex, then it's kind of like you going to buy an iPhone just for the camera. It's not a bad reason, and they have particularly good cameras and software. It's just there's so much more that you can do with them rather than just taking pictures. And if anything, if taking pictures and doing videos and content work is really what you want to do, then maybe the iPhone isn't what you should really be eyeing. Maybe you should get yourself a DSLR camera or some shit. Either way, the unfortunate reality is that such people aren't actually too far off from the people that believe that men and women can't actually be platonic friends, which, to be honest, is something that deserves an episode of its own, because that's another Pandora's box that needs to be opened. But so far from here on out, maybe I might be wrong, maybe I might be right. I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on IG, on Facebook. It is at Breaktime on Westside. On Twitter, it is at Bagaka the D. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.